One stat that you mentioned, and you mentioned this a little bit earlier about attention spans, that in 2018, our attention span is less than that of a goldfish. So, and I love the airplane oxygen mask example that you give in the book. You want to walk through that a little bit?
Yeah. This just stood out to me as an illustration of how far we've come with attention. So I believe it was in beginning of 2018, there was at the front of a plane, there at Boeing 737, I think, there was something really casual that happens every time we fly, and that's the in-flight announcements. And in fact, it's my favorite part of any flight, right? It's everybody's favorite part of flying, to hear the announcements. But I'm kidding, of course. So what happened is they gave the typical announcements just like every other day. They share about what to do if any emergencies happened. And of course, just like any time I fly, nobody was paying attention. And just a few minutes into the flight, there was a tragic accident with I think a hole blew out and from the engine on the side of the plane. And all of a sudden, a casual flight turned into an emergency. And so that's the tragedy of it. But the interesting takeaway from the attention side of this is, while that was happening, while everybody was instructed to put their oxygen mask on, just like they were instructed to in the announcements, somebody snapped a picture and put it on Twitter. And looking at the picture, they realized not one person in that photo actually had their mask on the correct way. And so the reality for us is very similar to the church, is those flight attendants had a life-saving message to communicate to everybody, and nobody was paying attention because they didn't grab their attention. They assumed they had it, but they didn't grab their attention in a way that they could get their message across. And so the reality is very similar for us in the church, is that I think often we, instead of earning people's attention, we often make the assumption that we already have it, and then we lose it very quickly on that. So the assumptions we make around attention, that people care about it as much as we do, are really no longer the case. And so we have to rethink how we communicate to grab attention.
So is there a takeaway here of maybe keeping things fresh? Keeping always, so it's not so rote. So for instance, the plane announcements, I think the reason why I tune out is it's the same thing over and over. I mean, it's the same exact way. But if there is a flight attendant that's having fun with it, or that is making a joke or dances with it, or just something that keeps it constantly fresh, then, you got my attention, dude. And so now it's a message that I've heard 1,000 times, but presented in a fresh way. Is there any takeaway?
Well, think about there's one company that does this very well, and that's Southwest. They don't have so what they do is they free up their flight attendants to have fun with it and make it personal. And so every time I've flown on Southwest, it looks a little bit different. There's some people that are pretty boring, and I'm keeping my headphones in. But when I see people I see others that are engaging them and connecting with them, and they aren't assuming that people are paying attention. They actually earn it and connect with people. Those are the people I'm leaning into. I mean, so there's videos everywhere of the flight attendant that's wrapping the announcements, or getting people engaged and connecting with them, and all of a sudden that message that feels mundane or feels like, I don't need this, all of a sudden becomes a message that people are leaning into and excited about. And so all it took was the effort of saying, I don't want to assume that I have their attention. I want to earn it. I want to connect with people in a way that's fresh and different, and that's what does the trick.
So we get the analogy, but let's take it one step further. So how do we keep it fresh in our church? How do we make it not so mundane every week?
Oh, goodness. And,
how do we earn it?
Yeah, in any message that we communicate, or anything specific?
In our communication in general.
Yeah, I think that's where creativity comes into play. I mean, our God is a very creative God, and you walk out in nature, there's all kinds of things that grab and capture our attention because of how beautiful they are, or unexpected they are. And I think when we tap into the creative gifts that God's given us, and layered into the realizing that we don't want to assume that people are paying attention, we want to earn it. I think it's a mix of those things where communication actually becomes fun. Like, it becomes a opportunity to really get our message across in a creative way. And so, like for us, a lot of what we try to do as a relatively big church is we try to help people connect with the personality of our church, and we want people to know that we're real and we're authentic and we're relatable. We're not trying to be this big stuffy church. We want to connect with people. And so, for example, if we're communicating Christmas services, that can feel like, okay, yeah, it happens every year. I get it. Yeah, it can feel like that in-flight announcement. But what we're often trying to do is bring humor into that. So we'll do a funny office-style video where our pastor is. It's all fake, but it's just fun. Like we'll do a funny video where our pastor is saying that he wants to play an instrument during our Christmas services. And so we create a fun office-like video out of this. And what we've learned from that is, instead of getting our pastor up in front of a camera and just speaking to the camera to say, hey, we want to invite you to Christmas this year, instead of doing that, and focusing on more of a fun Christmas style, office style video, we see people, we see the views go from 400 or 500 to sometimes 30, 40, 50,000, because that fun video is something that people connected with and they want to share, and it grabbed their attention and they kept watching. And so it took us just saying, we're not going to do what we've always done. We're going to look at this and say, how can we do something fresh and creative that we're energized and excited about ourselves,
right,
so that can then help communicate that message more effectively.
Right. One other stat that you share is that the person we're communicating with is already seeing about 10,000, huge number, branded messages a day. So, and we've already kind of hit on this, but how can we cut through that?
Again, it comes back to don't assume that your message is actually cutting through the noise on that. But I think the reality of any of us getting so many messages thrown at us is that it's really retraining our brains to only focus on the things that add value to us. And that sounds selfish, but it's really just a survival mechanism we've all built. And to know that there's so many things thrown at us, we can only give our attention to the things that really matter. And so I think for us as the church, this isn't just a communications thing. This is just the heartbeat of what we are all about. I think if we communicate in a way that speaks to what we want for people, not what we want from them, we have a better chance for our message to get across and cut through that noise. Because those 10,000 messages, most of those are things that somebody wants from us. They want us to buy a product. They want us to attend something or whatever. Like it's selling us something. That's not what we're here for as the church. We have a message that we want of things that Jesus wants for them, not what he wants from them in that way. So I think that has to be our change in posture, knowing that there's so much noise to cut through, that we need to really speak first to what's going to add value to that person we're connecting with, not communicating in a way that's just going to speak to what we need from them.
Right. So how is communications more of a ministry, not a job? How is communications a ministry? Yeah.
I think that's the most overlooked area of communication right now. I mean, honestly, because I think it's definitely the most overlooked ministry. When I think of our own team here, we get the opportunity to preach to a lot of people on Sunday. And that has so much value and it matters so much. But the reality is, so if we're able to reach about 4,000 to 5,000 people a week, in our building, in our services, the reality is also over this last year, we reached 7.4 million people on Facebook. And that's happening outside of the walls of our church, and that's primarily run through a 21-year-old social media manager. And so the reality of that is she's getting to preach to more people than our pastor does on Sunday. And so, they both matter immensely. But think about that. If we get to, we are very purposeful with how we do our Sunday services and how we preach. Well, guess what? The message that we're communicating in a digital way is also probably the only gospel that they're seeing on Facebook that day. So what a great opportunity and responsibility we have to be able to use that as ministry. And so when we look at the digital platforms we have, those are not just opportunities to just promote things. That's not what drives it. What drives us is we want to continue our mission as a church to engage those spaces to be able to connect with people in that way. And so that means we want to write blog posts that are helpful to people, that help them solve a problem they're dealing with in their lives right now.
Right.
We want to be using that as a way to engage people where they are, not only if they come to the front doors of a church on that. So it takes a rethinking of our mindset to think of communication not just as something we have to use to promote, as something more as something to say, this is just as much a ministry as anything else that we do as a church. Now they look different, but if we don't take hold of the opportunities we have there, we're just missing out on so many opportunities to engage with people that God's just laid out for us. I mean, think about what would Paul have done with Twitter? I don't think he would have said, hey, make sure to meet us here at this, at the gathering place today. No, he'd be engaging people with the gospel right there, because it's just as much of a communication medium there as preaching. And so they all have their own unique opportunities and shortfalls, but they all have the opportunity to communicate the gospel that we have. So that's why it's more of a ministry and not just a service department, not just a promotional department.
So going back to keeping things fresh and just kind of thinking out of the box and getting people's attention, tell me about the Elephant in the Church series that you guys did and some of the communications that you did around that. Yeah,
so we, just like most churches, we typically do our teaching through a sermon series, so a package of an idea fleshed out through multiple weeks. And what we were really trying to do is go back to what we were talking about earlier. Is we wanted to engage people at Easter to help them stay connected in the weeks that followed. And so that's our greatest opportunity to speak to the most people that call our church home and help them stay engaged afterwards. And so what we were trying to do is create an idea that spoke to a felt need for people, that would make them say, hey, I want to come back. I need to make sure we're prioritizing this and that we're going to come back. So luckily, because we were following our, the playbook that I kind of lay around in the church and in the Rethink Communication book I did, we had the time to actually brainstorm a ton of creative ideas to help leverage the opportunity we had. So in the weeks leading up to Easter, we started layering in this idea of that there's an elephant in the church. And so we did this for a couple of weeks where we were just teasing the idea by putting elephant stickers all over the church. And we didn't say anything about it, but we just wanted to create a little buzz to have people asking, hey, what's up with the elephant in the church? So we did that for a couple of weeks. And then we built a giant, I think 15-foot high elephant that we put in the middle of our atrium. And again, we didn't say anything about it. We just put it in there. And we tried to just leverage that as an opportunity to build some buzz. And as people would ask, we'd say, hey, be here next week. We're going to talk about the elephant in the church. And so when people came back, not only were they just like, please just tell us what's going on here, we had that chance to say, hey, there's an elephant in the church that everybody sees, everybody's thinking about, but nobody's talking about. And we're going to talk about it. So submit the questions that you think everybody in the church is thinking about, but nobody's talking about, and we're going to talk about it right after Easter. And so we use that as a chance just to connect with people and engage the questions that people were asking about depression, about anxiety, and a number of just really hot topic themes that people were wrestling with. That they feel like the church didn't know what the church thought about those things. So we use that as just a way to build up to Easter as well as post-Easter. And it was a fun way to grab attention and connect with people in a way that I think it broke a lot of the assumptions that people had of just, oh yeah, it's just another Sunday. No, we gave them a reason to lean in and also to invest themselves to make sure that they knew that they could ask questions and actually get those questions answered in the church.
Cool. Yeah. I love some of the pictures that you shared, and that was really neat. Okay. So what is the difference between, you talk about this urgent and important when it comes to communication? Mm-hmm. Walk me through the difference.
Yeah. So when you think about the messages that you have in the church, I mean, not every message is of the same importance. Every message matters, but the reality is the Bible study of 10 people may not be as important as the opportunity you have with Easter coming up to communicate to your whole community. And so what happens especially in the area of communication is sometimes the most urgent messages kind of squeeze out all the time that we really need to be putting into the most important messages. So what I try to lay out in that section is just communicate that fairness really can't be a value in communication, because not all messages are of the same importance. Again, every ministry matters, but it doesn't mean that every ministry needs to be communicated from the stage. It doesn't mean that every message should be crowding up your homepage, because I think as people are dealing with the 10,000 messages that they're receiving every single day, I think what they're counting on us for as the church is to say, here's what's most important that we're doing. Here's what we think matters to you, that should matter to you, and we want to provide clear next steps for you to engage with that. So we have to have some systems to be able to know what's most important.
So I've talked with several guys about, some people have like an 80-20 rule if it applies to 80% of the church. Some guys I've talked to are, we do one clear action step and that's it. Do you have a landing point on how many announcements you do, that sort of thing?
Yeah, I mean, as a broad rule, because I think every church is slightly different, so I don't think there's one blanket rule you can use for everybody. But where I have found the most clarity is I'm trying to answer for each week of the year, what are the 1 to 2 things that we want everybody in our church to know about and respond to.
Yeah.
And so the metrics I try to use of what would be worth doing a stage announcement for, what would be worth meeting the criteria of those 1 to 2 things, is I want it to reach at least 80% of the audience, or I want it to be a direct next step from what's being taught about. So, if you're talking about anxiety this week in your message, you may not talk about your care groups that you have every single week, but for that week, you make sure that you're communicating those things that are direct next steps from what you're teaching. So 80% of the audience, direct next step from teaching, or a key on-ramp from a ministry area. So what I believe is, like, I don't want to tell that small ministry that's in our church to say, hey, you're not important enough to be communicated about at all. Because I think in reality they are. And I want their passion to be, they're passionate about their ministry. And I want to make sure that they know for us as a team that we care about them too. So what we try to do is make sure that each key ministry area, in the area of like connections for us and groups, we know that for every group that we have in the church, we try to provide an on-ramp opportunity at the beginning of August and beginning of January to help people take a next step in a group. So we don't communicate about groups every single week necessarily. Diligent about letting people know about those opportunities for everybody to know there's a place for you in small groups, and same thing for missions and for all those things. So as you layer those out through the 52 weeks of the year, that's where we start to build those 1 to 2 things. And it ends up being pretty fluid in that way. It starts to build out pretty quickly. And so that's what I found to be most helpful for us.
All right. So last kind of thought I want to dive into with you is this idea of announcements, and that it's not announcements, that we shouldn't do announcements anymore. We should do next steps. Mm-hmm. And you kind of touched on that with clear on-ramp to this. Mm-hmm. Here's your action step. Kind of walk me through any thoughts that you have on that.
Yeah, I think when you think about an announcement, the expectation you have is an announcement often comes out of left field. Like you have to, it feels like a withdrawal from people. Of something that you're saying, hey, we want you to know about, we got to communicate this thing, here's what we want you to do about it. And that's often coupled with 7 or 8 or 9 other announcements. And the reality is that all of those typically get lost in the noise. And so what I would encourage churches to do is to take those standards that you have, whatever you develop, if that's 80%, 50%, whatever it is, and simplify it to a point where you can make those feel like direct next steps from your services or from what you're doing as a church. So, if there's where I challenge myself in my role as a creative arts pastor is I don't want people to come to any of our services and feel like they just got out of announcement time. So for us, what that means is we are trying to, some of our best announcements are the ones that don't feel like an announcement. So we may communicate like we have a summer camp going on for our students. So the best announcements that we're going to do are coming after sharing a video story of a student who accepted Christ at Rush Camp and saw their life completely transform and change. So we're going to share that story so that our church can celebrate that. And the next step from that is just saying, hey, if you have a student as well that is in 6th to 12th grade, we would love for them to experience the greatest week of their summer as well. And so it didn't feel like like a withdrawal from them. It felt like a deposit. It felt like something. Hey, I want that. I want that for my student, or I want that for myself. So what do I do about it? So that's the next step thinking rather than announcement thinking.
Good. Well, man, we've touched on a lot of the book. I want to encourage folks to check it out. So tell us where we can find it, how we can connect with you.
Yeah, you can go to rethinkcommunicationbook.com. That has all the links for all the different places you can grab the book. Feel free to just jump on Amazon as well. You can search my name or just search Rethink Communication, and you can grab it there. But if you love to connect with me, you can find my personal phone number at the end of the book. You can text me or call me there, or you can just email me, phil@philbowdle.com, or check out my website there, and all the links you can find there. So philbowdle.com.
Yep. Awesome, man. Well, thank you so much for your time and this content. I think it's really going to be great. It's getting out there a lot. You've had a lot of great reviews and stuff. So really great to see. I'm glad, just happy for you. I appreciate your time, man.
Hey, thank you so much. Appreciate you having me on.